hope you're doing well. I just finished a new book and I'm so excited to talk about it with you. The book is The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. This is the first book in the First Law trilogy. There are, I think, 10 books set in this world, this universe that Joe Abercrombie has created. This is, I guess, the gateway into all of that. And I think I'll continue based on this first book. This is fantasy, technically high fantasy because it's set sort of in a different world from ours. This story is about Logan Ninefingers, Captain Jezal Dan Luthar, Inquisitor Glokta, Sand Dan Glokta, and a wizard named Bayaz. There's a number of other characters like Pharaoh Malgin, or Malgin, I don't know how to pronounce that, and Malachus Kwai. A ton of different people play into this book. It's a great cast of characters. But the plot, essentially, is something that I'm going to leave a mystery to you. Suffice to say that you have some very good characters, and they're all going to start interacting, and there is a war brewing. There are multiple wars brewing, and these characters are going to have a hand in some way in the conflict that is beginning between different cultures and societies in this book. There also seems to be a deeper plot going on, but I'm not going to comment on it because I don't want to spoil anything by accident. For the review, let's go ground up. We're going to start with the world building. This world is good. It does feel a bit tropey at times. It's a pretty basic overall fantasy world. There is lore to it. There's sort of a creation myth for the societies that are in the world, and that sort of plays into the story. The societies are very clearly inspired by other fantasy and other parts of real life. There are mages, there's magic. The magic is sort of a mix between a hard and soft magic system. Hard magic system being very rule-based, soft magic system being more wonder-based, more like unknowable. This one has rules, but I think it's also intended to be sort of dramatic and beyond normal comprehension. So you know some rules, you don't know others. The cultures and societies in this book are, like I said, tropey. You could look at pretty much any other fantasy, high fantasy in particular, and find some sort of analog to the Union, to Gurkle, to the North. They're pretty straightforward. The world building is not what makes this book amazing, but it does its job. That's why I would say it's good. It's not a problem whatsoever. It's not insane. We're not talking Doom. We're not talking Middle Earth. This is just very good, and it provides a solid backdrop for the plot and the characters. Onto the plot. That was my first big problem with this book, actually, is it took a long time to pick up. After the first 100 pages, I felt like I finally sort of understood where things were going. Honestly, towards the end of the book, I'm still a little bit in the dark about where the series is going. That at first was a weakness because I was intrigued by some things, but I was sort of just like, where are we going? What's going on? However, that is actually, I think, intentional because it felt very real. These characters are in positions where they're dealing with difficult things, there's a lot of unknowables, there's a lot of uncertainty in their path and their future. And that's mirrored in the plot of the book. They kind of just roll with it. Some characters clearly have an idea of what's going on, but they're not point of view characters. And so the point of view characters are sort of just like, all right, I'm gonna do the best I can with what I've got. And I think that's actually really fun. It feels authentic. The narrators don't feel like they're too knowledgeable about things they wouldn't be. It feels very straight up and real. The plot itself is fun. There are some twists. It's not entirely predictable. It is a good time and it's very engaging, but it's also not necessarily plot driven. I think it's becoming plot driven. The big thing, the best part of this book in my opinion, are the characters. Of course, Logan Ninefingers is, I think at this point, kind of legendary in the canon of fantasy. He's an amazing character. Sand Dan Glokta is probably my favorite Inquisitor Glokta. He is tragic and so cool. Jezal Dan Luthar, if I could play any character in a film adaptation of any IP ever, I would play Jezal Dan Luthar. This dude is hilarious. I love him. He is so silly, and he's trying his best. He thinks he's, like, amazing. He's just kind of there. He's doing a good job. He's okay. Bayaz, amazing mage character. Malachus Kwai is hilarious. Brother Longfoot is dope. Let's see, Pharaoh Malgin, terrifying. Column West, I thought I was gonna love Column West, and then things changed. These characters are some of the most interesting and well thought out characters I've read ever. So that is the biggest strength of this. His characterization is amazing. The way he describes their movement, the way that they think, the way they talk. Everything is so well thought out. A hallmark of an amazing character writer to me is to make any character, regardless of if they're good or bad or morally gray, whatever, interesting and engaging to read. Even if I hate these characters, even the ones where I'm like, I find them so distasteful, I don't want anything to do with them. When I read their chapters, I'm so engaged in what they're doing and I want to know what's going to happen and what's going on and why they're acting like that. I don't think I like them necessarily, but I at least want to know about them, and that is incredibly well done. The other big strength with this, which is kind of a rare strength in a book, is the tone. Of course, tone is very important. I think for some books, it sort of comes as a part of world building and plot and characterization. It's almost a byproduct. This one, I think the tone is very intentional, and it's an absolute highlight. This feels incredibly real. I talked about this on a quick video, like a short form video on this book when I was about 100 pages in. And I was saying that you feel every hit, every time someone gets hit, every time someone steps and they're feeling pain in their leg from combat, every time someone is sick, every time something in the world is cold or dirty or wet. You feel that so directly. The visual imagery is amazing, but beyond that, the feel, the taste, the smell, the stink of it all, it is so well done in this book. Beyond that, it doesn't pull punches. Like, it really hits with full force and the gloves are off. When there is combat, this feels viscerally real. Like, the only combat experience I have is from boxing and martial arts. It is way less elegant than some authors might make it seem. Again, I've not had a lot of experience fighting, but I've had enough where I can understand, okay, if you're in a brawl, it's dirty, it's rough, and you kind of panic. It's not fun. That is really shown here, and it's taken to a different level, of course, because you have guys with swords and axes and bows. It's so legit, in my opinion. Again, I've not experienced this, but this to me feels actually impactful in terms of what's happening with combat and with general everyday stuff. Like, when it's hot in this book, it's not just hot, it's stuffy, it's sweaty. You're in the wrong clothes for it, they're leather, and you're sweating through your clothes, and it's disgusting, and it's like very well put together here. It feels just so real. It makes everything in this book so tangible and so enjoyable to experience, even when, again, it's distasteful. Like the hot, sweaty days where everyone's like peeling their clothes off them, you're like, oh, I've been there. Yeah, it's gross, but it's actually legit. To add to that, this book has something that I've seen very rarely in other books. People actually poop and pee in this book. There are almost a concerning amount of times where pee is mentioned. There was a line, I think it was like, say one thing about Logan Ninefingers, say that he has to piss. That's so funny. There's another character, I don't want to say his name because it might be a mild spoiler, but that dude, every time he goes into combat, there's a line about him being like, I gotta piss so bad. Like, I have to pee so bad, I'm so nervous, I'm so scared I have to pee. That's funny, and it's real. It's like, yeah, I wouldn't expect a character going into combat, this dirty, grimy, bloody combat, to be totally like, chill. That's not the case here. They're like, yeah, it's terrifying. Some of the characters are cool with the combat, but they're kind of shown as crazy. It's super straight up, and I love that. One key thing about the realism and the imagery and the gritty nature of this book is that it doesn't go overboard. Game of Thrones is one example of a book where I didn't really enjoy a lot of it because it was so dark and gritty and focused on how brutal and bad everything was. This one is genuinely realistic. It's not grimdark, it's not intentionally overindulgent in bloodshed and brutality and dirtiness and pain. It's just like, yeah, when you get hit with a sword, when you get, hit in general, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna have impacts. And, we're not gonna sugarcoat that. We're gonna show it as it is, talk about it, it's gonna have an impact, and then you're gonna move on. It's not like, oh, it was so bad, it's horrible, nothing but pain, your whole world is pain. Which happens sometimes in books, especially fantasy. This is just like, yeah, man, you get hit with an arrow, you're gonna have a bad time. What are you gonna do about it? I like that. I think it's very straightforward and very realistic, and it adds a lot of credence to the book. In terms of themes, I think that is a weak point of this book so far, and maybe in the trilogy it'll be better, but so far it's just like, yeah, classism bad, which is, in my opinion, common knowledge. Yeah, of course, when you have a crazy ruling class that's trying to squeeze every bit of money out of the people under the ruling class, that is bad, That's kind of the main thing that's going on. Really, the main thing I'm getting is classism, and I guess some themes about leadership and societal structure, and that's a great theme. It's important to talk about, it's important to remark on, but it's not really like heavily delved into here. It's sort of just there. It's not like this was built around the theme. This feels more so that it was built around the characters. So the theme is just sort of there. It's part of the world building, part of the plot, but it's not really like a focus. Like Dune had a focus of environmentalism. It had a focus of religion. Those were key parts of the whole thing, and you could really feel that tangibly. This is just like, yeah, it has a little bit of that. It's not like a central element necessarily. I'm adding a new category to this review because I just feel amazing emotions when I read this. I really felt like I was in it, and being able to be transported is such a unique and wonderful thing in a fantasy book. It's not across the board at all. To give you an example, I just literally yesterday tried to start reading Fourth Wing. I could not, I have so many problems with the book. I couldn't get into it at all. I was like, yeah, this is like, someone is clearly writing this. This was like, yeah, I could almost feel like this is a journal entry. It's not structured like that, but I'm like, yeah, this could be someone's experience in a different world. My biggest complaint with this book is that like 90% of the characters are men. There are very few women. Of the women that are there, I think there's like 3 that kind of become actual recurring characters. A lot of them are written in very masculine ways, which is not bad in any sense, because of course there's a lot of variance in gender identity and expression, so you know, the way that you act and the way that you identify don't always have to be the same. You can sort of be whoever you want to be. But when you have a male author trying to write women, and they sort of end up feeling like the male characters, it just feels like they didn't really write women. And it sort of feels unrealistic. Like, out of all the significant characters in this book, having only a few be women, I guess it makes sense in the world building. I get that given the sexist societies that are in this book that reflect our real life society in many different ways. You might not have as many women who are warriors or are mages, I don't know, or are politicians. But in general, it just felt like there were not that many women in the story. In most places you have a pretty even distribution of like gender variety, but this was just like 90% men. They're not poorly written men, they're not bad characters, they're great characters, I think they're awesome. But could there have been more women in this book? Absolutely. Could they have been better written? I think so. That being said, I don't think it ruins the book. I think maybe for me as a dude reading this book, I'm a little bit more like, yeah, I can see a lot of men and still relate to it and still be engaged. Maybe for a non-masculine person, this would not feel relatable or approachable. And that's a valid position to take. So if you're considering reading this, keep that in mind. I don't think it's egregious. Like, I've actually not finished multiple books, because the female characters, the women in the story, the non-male characters, the non-masculine characters were treated terribly. They were written terribly, terrible things happened to them for no real reason. It was just like, yeah, this is misogyny incarnate. This is actually decent, but I just think that it's 2024, we can do a lot better. In any event, the vast majority of this book was incredible. I have already recommended this to multiple people. I really enjoyed it. To me, the biggest pluses are the tone and the characterization. The plot is cool, it's interesting, I'm curious to see where it goes. The world building is solid, the magic is interesting to an extent. The best parts of this are the people in it and what is going on with them, and I cannot wait to see what they do next. Have you read The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie? What are your thoughts? Are you planning to read it? Let me know, because I want to hear about it. In any event, thank you so much for being here. I hope that was insightful, and as always, happy reading.